Next week we're going to start the product. So obviously this week we want to be able to finish these up, get them rendered out. Some common things people mess up on these is either rendering them animating too fast or too slow, or the wrong camera angles, or their cameras are just going crazy. So some things that we want to obviously keep in mind. So this is my scene. This is my adjuster. No, not that one. Where are you at? There. Come on. Where are you? There you are. Nope, I just had it selected a second ago. There he is. So he's inside there. Yep, and I called it animate this field. That makes sense. Okay. Nope, it's still not working. Why did you just stop working all of a sudden? All right, let me reopen this file. Something just got corrupted while I turned the projector on. And let's turn the audio off. There we go. All right, so now it seems to be working correctly. All right. So looking at this as a whole scene, so everything is basically like where it's going to be starting at. I want to get an idea of where my camera is going to be coming in from, because that's really going to be the dictating factor as to how I animate this field coming in there and moving stuff around. So as I kind of spin into my scene like this, I think this might be a kind of a cool way to hit it from this angle, okay? So now that I know that, I can create a camera. And for now, I'm just going to leave it here. If I look through it, you'll see it's the same exact spot as before, so I don't need to worry about that. And I'm just going to move out. So I know there's my camera. That's where I'm going to be set up at. Here's my animation field of it going in there. Now, the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to have everything disappear. So as my camera goes into the scene, everything just like goes away. So I'm going to time this out, and then I can time my camera out as well and kind of sync those two things up. So I'm going to go to my animate field. I'm going to set some keyframes on my position. I'm going to go up to, I believe we had this be 200 frames. Let me double check just to make sure. Whoops. 10 seconds at 24. Yeah, so 240 frames. I'm going to go 240. Drag this up to 240. Make sure my ticker is at 240 here. And then I'm just going to drag this through the scene. Now I've already at this point, made sure that all my stuff works. So I already know that this field is actually controlling all these things to make them go away. Obviously, if something's missing, I can always add it in there later. So it's not a huge deal. And then I will keyframe this. Okay. So now if I were to rewind this and hit play, I should get an animation of all these things moving. Now one thing that I don't want to happen is that everything is just kind of like going at different speeds. They should feel pretty fluid. Right now the way that Cinema sets keyframes is everything is eased in at the beginning, a certain speed, and then eased out at the end. So it tries to create this nice smooth softening, easing in and easing out. And that's fine for some things, but for this I really want it to be just like a gradual thing, like it's just automatically the same speed. So I'm going to right click, go to animation and say show F curve, and you'll see there's that graph. So here it is easing into the motion of it starting. It goes at a certain speed and then it eases out of that motion, okay? So I'm just going to grab this and just say linear, and that will make sure everything goes at the exact same speed. So there's no speeding up or slowing down of this. Now at this rate, it's very difficult to see how fast it's actually going. For the most part, we just kind of like let it go, and then trusting that 240 should be a good number. Okay, so it looks like everything's working. So now I'm going to jump into my camera. And I'm going to set up some of my parameters for the camera. So I always want to set up like the focal length of how big this is. If I set this to something like 10, you'll remember this gives me a very like deep area where everything looks really perspective-y. Something like this works pretty good if you go a bit bigger to like 90. That way you're like on top of the items as they're disappearing. Cool, so that works. So now I'm going to take my camera and zoom out. So I'm going to deselect, make sure this is selected in white, and then zoom out. And I'm going to try to get to about the same spot that field is at. Okay, so it's about in this area. So I'm going to go here. I can click and drag through this just to make sure that things are disappearing. Yep, that looks good. Okay, so now I can grab the camera, go to my coordinates, and set a keyframe. Then I'll go up to 240, and then click off the camera and then zoom through the scene. Anytime we do a camera move, we always want to be very subtle about it. If you watch movies and you kind of pay attention to the cameras and what they're doing, typically they are going to be just like a push in, a pull out, a left, right, maybe a little bit of a spin. There's nothing that's going to be like some crazy like flying through camera angle unless it's like a spaceship flying through space. Right? So that's a keyframe here, keyframe there. We should have pretty much a straight line. Now I'm going to go back and preview this, and then I'm going to adjust my camera as needed. What I want to do is have the camera be basically like right in front of the action. If my camera is too far away from stuff, I need to adjust it, okay? So I'm making sure that everything looks good here. That looks pretty good. Yeah, so that looks pretty decent how fast everything is going, or where the camera is at. Let's say that I needed to adjust it. I can right click, I can go to animation, I can go to F curve. This end one, I can leave that as easing out, like kind of softening, but maybe this start one, I'll make that one linear. Come on. Linear, there we go. Why it didn't work the first time? There we go. And then this one too, grab that. All right, and rewind it, hit play. Now we also want to make sure we don't get ahead of the action, so sometimes your camera will move faster than your animator, and what will happen is your camera is basically just seeing the items, and behind the camera, everything is disappearing, and that's obviously not effective. So here I have a good amount of stuff that is moving. Yeah, that's pretty good there. All right, now let me go into the camera again. Let me go back into this. And just so we can see, if I grabbed all of these, okay, that's good. I'm going to really exaggerate this motion. So if I grab the curves, come on, grab the curves, grab the curves, do that. All right, so I'm really going to, sorry, the other way, exaggerate how fast this moves. Let's do one at a time. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to cause it to move very quick at the front and very slow at the end, okay? This is not what we want, okay? What's going to happen, we're going to get ahead of the action. So there's my camera going, and it's going to, oops, almost hit a tree. Okay, and then here we might, nope, we still didn't. Here we're like maybe too close to the action where we're not seeing the big picture of everything moving, but it might be kind of a nice shot too. It's actually not as bad as I was expecting. Let's try that again. Let's go back to our curve. Back to the curve. Come on, camera, rewind. Curve. Why don't you want to show up? Timeline, there it is. It's weird. All right, so let's try that even further. Oops. One at a time. All right, so let's grab this one again and oh, that's why. I'm animating the wrong one. I'm going to grab the camera. That's why I didn't have the handlebar. So again, I'm just going to really make this a drastic movement just so I can emphasize that point of animating this so that it gets a two-head of the action. Okay, and again, this is something we don't want to do. There we go. So now we're ahead of the action. All the explosion, whatever stuff is behind us. We can't see any of it. It's just way too quick. Okay, we're also probably going to go through a building. Yep, right there. So that's definitely a no-no. It's kind of cool right there where it happened, but we don't want that. Another thing I noticed too, look at my building is kind of floating right there. So that would definitely need to be fixed. Okay, so when you do your camera movements, pay attention to where the camera is moving. F curve. I don't know why that just stopped showing up. That's very weird. Let's go back to this. Let's make these linear. There we go. Okay, now if you want to see just speed-wise how fast this is going, you can turn off some of your items here, and that way you won't see them. So this is my wall, so I can hide that. This is my house stuff, I can hide these. And if I come down to the tree area, I can hide those. And eventually I'll get to a spot where when I hit play, it actually will go somewhat quicker than it was going before. Just for as far as speed goes, giving you an idea of how fast the camera's moving. But this seems to be moving at a good pace. All right, so that's everything there. I forgot the walls right here. There we go. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to jump out of the camera. And then I'm going to go and set up some lights. So I already have a physical sky in here. That's what I showed before in the video. Having that definitely helps. If I needed to add any additional lighting, I could add an area light. I could add a spotlight. Let's say that I had a house, and that house had a little lantern, and I wanted that lantern to have a light. I could add just a light right there. Okay. Same thing with area light. If I needed that, I would add that to this. This one actually has pretty decent lighting. Let me make sure that my settings are low enough that this will not render very long. Nope. Jump back into my camera, hit Shift-R again. So you'll see it's very plain, simple rendering. That's pretty much good enough there. I'm going to add some other stuff to this. So I'm going to go into my physical render. I'm going to go to Effect, and I'm going to add in Ambient Occlusion. And now when I render this, what we should get is more of a contact shadow between the items. So we should get a little bit more depth in our scene. Here it is before, there it is after. You can see how we get this, just this tiny bit of extra depth in there really does help us sell the idea that this is more of a complete scene. Okay, so just that ambient occlusion. If we wanted to make this a little bit more effective, we could take this maximum ray length down. So if I were to set that to 10, that should crisp it up a little bit more so we don't get so much ambient occlusion in these areas. We would get it, or in these areas, we would get it more in those. So there it is before, there it is after. So you can see how we have a little bit more contrast in the corners, which again is, just makes it look a little bit more polished. Okay, and again, just a little bit more there. All right, so maybe here this was 10. I think 10 was probably a better number than 2. That's good. All right, other stuff that we could add to this that may be helpful is if we had a depth of field. That would definitely be cool. I've already gone over that in a different video, so I'm not going to do that here. For this video part, I'll go over it for the still. But we would go to the object, we would tell it the focus distance, and then we would go to physical, we would lower this, and then we would go into our physical settings and turn on depth of field. Another thing that will help is motion blur. Having motion blur on this will make this look a lot better. Because as things move, if we're videotaping them, we're going to get some kind of blurriness that would happen. It wouldn't be just like a crisp item moving away. So adding motion blur by just clicking that button will definitely help add a little bit more realism to our scene. So now this feels like there's a lot more motion, compared to if I turn this off. This doesn't feel like we have a whole lot of motion. Just in that still even, you can tell. Okay, so definitely add motion blur to your scene. Definitely add ambient occlusion. And then that should be it for all the stuff we need. I would take this up to high. I would go to my output. Make sure this is 960 by 540. Make sure this is set to all frames. Make sure my saving is going into my folder. Environment. Sarcona environment. Make sure this name is set to name.number.extension. And then I would hit save, of course. And then I would hit Shift-R, and then it'll go through and it'll make each one into a movie, or into an individual file that will then obviously go into a movie. Typically, you want to let it preview, make sure it's rendering the right camera, because right now I'm in the camera. You can see it's white checkmarked. Sometimes what happens, let me close this out, people will click this off, be way out here, hit the render button, and that's what ends up rendering. You're not actually rendering the camera you're looking through, so you end up with 240 frames of the wrong thing, okay? And the only fix for that is to click that button, hit the render button again, and let it go through all of that, right? So you want to preview it, let it go through a couple frames, make sure the animation's moving, make sure it feels like everything is progressing the way it should, throw your render sign on it, come back in a day, and then check on it, okay? So that's part of the assignment is the animation. Put in After Effects, make it into a movie just like we've done before. And then the other part of that assignment is going to be to create a high-res still. So in this one, this is really where you can pull out all the stops. Going into the, making sure these are on, depth of field, adding motion blur. Under output, this resolution is going to be 3000 by 2400. And then if I go into a brand new camera, because I don't want to ruin my original one, I'm going to just make sure my focal length is set to 90. Maybe I'll go to 150 on this one. And then what I'm going to do is just try to find a cool spot where a lot of action is happening. So like right there, that might be a cool angle to hit. So I'm in my camera 1. Maybe not 150. Let's go to 50. And get right on top of this. Let me jump back a little bit. Like that spot might be a cool spot. We got the tree coming up. We got that moving. That might be kind of neat. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to my camera. I'm going to set my focus distance by clicking the arrow and then saying I want that to be in focus. And then go to my physical, set this f-stop to 0.125. I'm not going to hit Shift-R, I'm just going to hit Control-R, and that way I can see right in my viewport what my rendering is looking like. If I hit Shift-R, it's going to try to render out the whole thing. Now this is going to take some time because of how it's set up. So let me go back to this. Let me go back to my save. I'm going to type in the word still here and then change this to current frame. I'm also going to go into my physical and change this from adaptive to progressive. Okay? So now when I hit Shift-R, it does go into this, but what it's going to do is it's going to show me everything and then gradually refine the entire image as a whole. So it might take a second for that first image to pop up. Here it comes. But we can a lot quicker see what's happening in the view. The adaptive one, what it does is it goes through that square and says, what does this one square look like? And gets it perfect. Then it goes to the next square. What does this one look like? And then it goes on to the next one. Here, we're able to a lot quicker see what's happening. I'm also going to turn down under my physical. Let me just turn motion blur off just so I can focus on just depth of field. And let me turn my output size down to something a little bit easier to work with. So 600 for now. If I lower the settings, do all my test previews, Then when I'm ready to go, I just increase those settings, do it at a higher resolution, and then it's good. So right away, you can see this is way too blurry for the whole thing. So I jump back to my camera, I go to that f-stop, and I increase this to, let's say, 0.5. Re-render it, yes, yes. And now we're getting more of that depth of field look, okay? I'm going to set this to 1. I think that might be better. Anytime you do depth of field, unless you're going for like Ant-Man type of like zoomed in depth of field look, you want it to have this like softness, but you don't want it to be like overly soft, okay? So like this is almost there. We can definitely see the blurriness here. We can see the crispness there. I'm going to go to maybe 3. Let's see what that looks like. All right, so that looks pretty good. So this is nice and clear in this area, and then that's a little bit fuzzy. That feels more like a realistic camera would look. We're getting that softness around the edges, but we're not like, you know, super like macro lensed in there. Cool. So I would say, yes, stop that. Then I would crank my settings back up, 3000 by 2400. That frame's good. Under my physical, I turn motion blur back on, set this back to adaptive. This is set to high. I would save, of course, and then I would render out my still. And then now we would just wait. And this one rendering, this one image might take an hour to render out because we're rendering it at such a large size. Some of the stuff when we get into like later classes, it might take 2 hours or 3 hours to render out an image, depending on how much detail and how much stuff we have working on it. But you'll see just this one, that dot, that square in the middle, still isn't there yet. Yes, sir.
Would you recommend putting the settings for the physical to high or automatic?
Let's close that. When we're in here, if you set this to automatic, sometimes it'll do an okay job, sometimes it won't. Just trying to figure out it yourself. If you set it to high, you're typically going to get the best settings, which obviously you can adjust too. In this scene, I don't have a lot of small details. If I had like hair or grass or something like that, this sampling subdivision would have to be up a lot higher, maybe like 8 or 10. On automatic, you'll see that we don't even get the option to change any of those. Okay, so I would let that go. I would have, by the end of this, when I'm all done with it, I should have a movie of my camera zooming through the shot. Everything's kind of either breaking apart or coming together. And then I should have a still image of just like that kind of stuff. Think of just like we did in the hologram too. I would then take that still image into Photoshop and I would retouch it. I would maybe add some vignetting to it. I would add some color adjustments to it. Anything that you might think would enhance that image. And then I would turn that in along with my other stuff, and then that assignment is good. Cool. Questions on finishing that one up? No? Okay. The good